صلوا على النبي. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومهم من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين وما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إنا أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه شعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. مومنوں مقتل زہرا کی یہ روداد سنو، کی ہے امت نے مصیبت میں جو بیداد سنو. مصطفیٰ مارے گئے گھر ہوا برباد سنو، باپ کو روتی ہوئی بیٹی کی فریاد سنو. اس کو رو لو جسے اس کو رو لو جسے رونے کا اجازہ نہ دیا، آ کے امت نے جسے باپ کا پرسہ نہ دیا، آ کے امت نے جسے باپ کا پرسہ نہ دیا. باپ کے غم میں تھی غمگین نبی کی بیٹی، غش پغش کھاتی تھی فرقت میں پیمبر کی علی. روتی حسنین کو لپٹا کے تھی زہرا بی بی، خشک نہ قبر پیمبر کی ہوئی تھی مٹی. شرم سرور کے شرم سرور کے یتیموں سے نہ کھائی آ کر، آگ دروازے پہ امت نے لگائی آ کر، آگ دروازے پہ امت نے لگائی آ کر. ہائے بولی دروازے کے پیچھے سے یہ آ کر زہرا، کیوں مسلمانوں کیا ہے میرے گھر پر حملہ. ان کی بیٹی ہوں کہ تم پڑھتے ہو جن کا کلمہ، اپنے بابا سے میں فریاد کروں گی للہ. ہم ستائے ہوں کو ہم ستائے ہوں کو اور ستاتے کیوں ہو؟ یہ تو بتلاؤ میرے گھر کو جلاتے کیوں ہو؟ یہ تو بتلاؤ میرے گھر کو جلاتے کیوں ہو؟ ایک لئیں بولا کہ حیدر کو نکالو باہر، ورنہ آ جاؤں گا بن پوچھے میں گھر کے اندر۔ سن کے رونے لگی یہ بات نبی کی دختر، لات دروازے پہ ماری لئیں نے بڑھ کر۔ آ کے پہلو پا آ کے پہلو پا وہ جلتا ہوا دروازہ گرا، بیچ میں تھیں در و دیوار کی ہائے زہرا، بیچ میں تھیں در و دیوار کے ہائے زہرا۔ جلتے دروازے کے اوپر سے مسلمان گزرے، اور تھی فاطمہ زہرا اسی در کے نیچے، شور کرتے ہوئے گھر میں جو لئیں آ پہنچے، دیکھ کر بلوے کو روتے تھے علی کے بچے۔ در کو اماں سے در کو اماں سے ہٹاتی تھی پریشاں زینب، ہے مدینے میں بھی یہ شام غریباں زینب، ہے مدینے میں بھی یہ شام غریباں زینب۔ تھی بہت صابرہ پر بنت علی چیخ اٹھیں، کیل جلتے ہوئے دروازے کی پہلو میں لگی، قتل محسن ہوئے اور ساتھ میں ٹوٹی پسلی، عرش تھرانے لگی زہرا کی یوں گود اجڑی۔ تھام لو آ کے تھام لو آ کے ذرا مجھ کو یہ زہرا نے کہا، ہائے فضا میرا بچہ میرا محسن نہ رہا، ہائے فضا میرا بچہ میرا محسن نہ رہا۔ دوڑی حجرے کی طرف در کو ہٹا کر زہرا، تازیانہ جو علی کے لیے اٹھتا دیکھا، اپنے بازو پاؤ سے زہرا نے بڑھ کر روکا، اور غضب اس پہ کہ کنفد نے تماچا مارا، باندھی گردن میں باندھی گردن میں رسن کر کے گرفتار لئیں، لے گئے حیدر کرار کو دربار لئیں، لے گئے حیدر کرار کو دربار لئیں۔ بات سرکار کے امت نے ستم کیا نہ کیا، حق علی کا نہ دیا باغ فدق چھین لیا، فاطمہ زہرا کے دروازے پہ بلوا بھی کیا، چین سے عطرت اطہار کو رہنے نہ دیا، آ گیا کیسا آ گیا کیسا مدینے میں زمانہ غربت، فاطمہ زہرا کو دربار بلایا غربت، فاطمہ زہرا کو دربار بلایا غربت۔ مسجد نبوی میں ظالم نے سجایا دربار، اور اصحاب پیمبر سے بھرا تھا دربار۔ آ گئیں روتی ہوئی فاطمہ زہرا دربار، کہتی تھی بابا کے امت نے دکھایا دربار۔ آپ نے دی تھی آپ نے دی تھی جو تحریر وہ لے آئی ہوں، 7 بچوں کو گواہی کے لیے لائی ہوں، 7 بچوں کو گواہی کے لیے لائی ہوں۔ وائے افسوس کہ زہرا کی حیا کی نہ گئی، بیٹھے اصحاب رہے بنت پیمبر تھی کھڑی۔ جھوٹا زہرا کو کہا اور قیامت نہ ہوئی، بڑھ کے ایک شخص نے سرور کی وصیحت چھینی۔ فاطمہ روتی رہیں، فاطمہ روتی رہیں اور نہیں ہنستے رہے، خاک پہ پھینک دیے کر کے سند کے ٹکڑے، خاک پہ پھینک دیے کر کے سند کے ٹکڑے۔ دیکھتی رہ گئیں عالم غربت زہرا، لب پہ بس ایک ہی فریاد تھی بابا بابا۔ کیسے جھٹلا دیے حسنین علی جیسے گواہ، خوف آیا نہ مسلمانوں کو اللہ اللہ، کر چکی ٹکڑے کر چکی ٹکڑے سند کے جو اکٹھا زہرا، ہو گئی تھی انہی لمحوں میں ضعیفہ زہرا، ہو گئی تھی انہی لمحوں میں ضعیفہ زہرا۔ کیا بیاں ہوں گے جو زہرا پہ ستم ڈھائے گئے، اس پہ پابندی کے مظلوم نہ فریاد کرے۔ کی مسلمانوں نے حیدر سے شکایت آ کے، غم میں بابا کی بھی رونے نہ دیا جی بھر کے۔ زخمی تھا پہلو زخمی تھا پہلو بہت، سانس بھی کتنی چلتی، غل ہوا مر گئی ایک روز نبی کی بیٹی، غل ہوا مر گئی ایک روز نبی کی بیٹی۔ روک لو اپنا بیاں ہوگی قیامت برپا، پنجتن اون حسن ہو گئے محوے گریا، پردہ غیب میں روتا ہے علی کا بیٹا، انتقام آ کے وہ لے گا ابھی دادی کا۔ ہاتھ ٹوٹی ہوئی ہاتھ ٹوٹی ہوئی پسلی سے اٹھا لیتی ہے، قبر سے فاطمہ زہرا بھی دعا دیتی ہے، قبر سے فاطمہ زہرا بھی دعا دیتی ہے۔ پر محمد و آل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عدم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا باستشهاد سيدة فاطمة الزهراء سلام الله عليها. Surah Fatiha is requested for the Salih Sawab of the marhumin listed on the screen and for all marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Yaman Ujibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those in need here and elsewhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Wise and Women's Circle Program. Wise Academy and Women's Circle invite all the ladies of the community to attend a special presentation by Sister Zahra Mukhi titled The Seasons of Life. Sister Zahra has tailored this topic so that it applies to women of all ages and stages of life. Please RSVP to help us in planning. We look forward to seeing you there on November 29th at 6:30 p.m. Shop with the Sheikh in a Cop. Our annual collaboration with Sanford Police will take place on Saturday, December 16th at 10 a.m. at the Sanford Target. This is an opportunity for us to support our Sanford community by gifting a shopping spree to underprivileged children. To sponsor a child, you can Zelle at donate@masjid.org with the note Shop Sheikh. For more information, you can text Sister Sukina Virani at 407-488-7104. Please donate generously for this cause. Before we begin the program, we have a short video prepared by Bilal Muslim Mission Kenya. Unfortunately, the representative, Brother Hussein Ali Khaki, had to get back to Toronto earlier today, and therefore, if you have any questions, you can contact him on the number that will be shown at the end of the video.
Welcome to Bilal Muslim Mission of Kenya. A charitable Muslim organization established in 1972, dedicated to working with children, families, and communities in the rural villages in the coast and eastern provinces of Kenya. The mission serves the less fortunate people residing in the rural villages. Under the Economic Upliftment Program, we provide microfinance and tailoring and dressmaking classes. Financial literacy training and access to interest-free loans has enabled numerous women to generate income, save money, and foster economic independence. Investing in infrastructure to enable access to clean, sustainable water in underserved communities is a priority for us, and 13 fully operational solar-powered water desalination plants have already been installed at our centers. This has opened up a new era of health and safety for communities residing there, with safe water available for drinking, irrigation, and hygiene. This year, the mission accomplished the distribution of 180 tons of maize flour and other essential provisions to thousands of needy families in 40 distinct locations. The advancement of the message of Islam through the teachings of the Holy Quran and the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt remains an elemental function of the mission. Majalis, workshops, and seminars are conducted throughout the year at all of our 15 centers, and programs held at the Bilal Hall in Mombasa are live streamed in an effort to engage the wider community. The months of Muharram, Safar, and Ramadan are especially busy. Our madrasas play an essential role in imparting valuable Islamic knowledge and Quranic skills to children aged between 5 and 18. The mission is passionate about promoting holistic education and enhancing learning opportunities at all our institutions. The 15 pre-primary units are a requisite link between the home environment and primary schooling. The Feed a Child program ensures the provision of warm, milky millet porridge for breakfast. The mission offers its support to local subsistence farmers. Farmers play a vital role in our economy, and the mission offers its support in the fostering of entrepreneurship and the promotion of food security. For more details, please contact Brother Hussein Ali Kaki and Brother Hussein Jafar.
I'd like to invite Dr. Kirmani to give tonight's lecture with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, how do we foster spirituality in our lives? When we look at the life of the A'immah, you'll find certain themes and patterns throughout their lives. If you ask their people of their society and their time and historians, that they would say that they were all people of knowledge. The 14 Ma'sumin, they had this element of being the most knowledgeable of their time. Also, you would find that they were people in whatever capacity that they could. Sometimes the means differed, but their goal was always to bend society towards justice, towards righteousness, towards fairness, in some way, shape, or form, depending on what the environment allowed. At times it was through their words, at times it was through their actions, at times it was through both, at times it was through du'as, at times it was through education and the universities, at times it was through the implicit approach, and times it was through the explicit approach. But they were always trying to implement that knowledge in a righteous, just way. Having said this, tonight in discussing the Lady of Light, this great individual, I want to look at what are some things about her that we can learn to implement in our own lives. That is, how can we enlighten our own lives through the Lady of Light? And in particular, how can we learn from the traits that she had, which were above gender, the traits of courage, the traits of patience, the traits of spirituality, the traits of knowledge. Meaning to say what? Meaning to say that what is it that the Lady of Light, Bibi Fatema, teaches you and I in terms of how we can get a direction of what we're to do in life. Not only in this time, but also in the future. And how does she tell us to make a stand for justice, against injustice? And how did she do that? And how does that perhaps even draw a parallel to people in our own time, standing for the right against the wrong? And what is it about doing this communally? And finally, with respect to this, why is it so important to remember and commemorate Fatimiyya according to our ulama, our maraji, our scholars, with respect to their looking at and understanding where Fatima al-Zahra is in the Quran, in the ahadith, and also in the eyes of the A'immah themselves. And inshallah tonight we'll conclude with the commemoration of the istishhad of the great Lady Fatima al-Zahra. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are, here in Florida, across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, sadna salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. At the first level, when you look at the life of Bibi Fatema, she's an individual who at every moment in time was someone who was striving to try to bring ease and solace to the lives of those around her. So for example, at a young age, she was the one who used to nurse and heal and apply ointment and cleanse the wounds of Rasulullah. As you know, when Rasulullah used to go to Taif for tabligh or in other environments, Bibi Fatema is the one that would clean off the wounds and give a solace to Rasulullah. Where indeed Rasulullah himself says that, as a person who's trying to change the world, you try to think, for example, just from a human perspective, that, I can tolerate this, but then when it comes to your family, that's when things start getting difficult. Can they tolerate this? Should they tolerate this? Maybe they're going through difficulties because of me. And a daughter, perhaps she wouldn't want to see her father in this state, the relationship between a daughter and the father. But at the same time, Rasulullah says, I get energized through Fatima al-Zahra to do more tabligh. Meaning, it was the personality of Fatima al-Zahra, after going through difficulties, he would get this solace, this taskeen, this serenity in his heart and his mind. Number one. Number two, when it came to this, as you know, when they troubled Rasulullah in the early days of Islam, and they threw the intestines of a sheep on Rasulullah, or a camel according to some narrations, when he was in the vicinity of the Kaaba, nobody was there to support Rasulullah because of fear and trepidation. This is a principle in life, that in the early phase, people are very afraid to stand up. And when the early Muslims came, they faced heavy persecution. As you know, the mother and the father of Ammar bin Yasir and Sumayya, heavy persecution. Bilal, heavy persecution. Because what the opposition and the forces of dhulm, they look at, they say that, if it's one person, I can take them on. Let me make an example out of this person. But when people come together, eventually then they have to succumb and say, I will not do this, because they can't take everyone on. So the same thing was going on at that time. The early Muslims, some of them, they were saying that how can we defend Rasulullah, because some of them may have not even made their religion public. Fatima al-Zahra is the one who assisted Rasulullah in that time. So the element of the equation of that I want to highlight at this next phase is simply this, which is a simple and straightforward principle, but extremely difficult to implement. Meaning what? That is, one of the elements of spirituality, which I alluded to a couple of nights ago, is this: to be able to strive on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also try to bend society towards the betterment, towards justice, towards fairness, towards equity, towards equality, towards fairness, and still not get demoralized and bitter. You know what happens sometimes when we are trying to do something in society and we're trying to work for the community, we're trying to work for our society, sometimes the me gets in the way. The me gets in the way. So for example, I may think to myself, hey, I want to do the right thing for the community, and I'm going to make a stand and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But I sometimes start on that journey with good niyyah, with good ikhlas. But on the way, when I see the makar of people, when I see the acts of people, and then I start getting bitter. And then sometimes along the way, you forget your original intent. That's why in Islam, the means and the ends matter. So one of the biggest challenges of being a follower of the Ahlul Bayt and to go to the higher levels of spirituality is to get societal and strive for societal islah and correction, while at the same time operating with compassion and love. It's very easy to say, very difficult to do. To want to change the society, despite people maybe cursing at you, despite people maybe throwing stones at you as they threw on Rasulullah, despite all of those things, but still have this. The poet says, "Ye hikayat hai koi, na koi afsana," relating to Rasulullah. Ahmad Nadeem Qasimi. He says, "Ye hikayat hai koi, na koi afsana, sang baron pe tera abre dua ban jana." He says, this is not a story or a fairy tale. Reality, this is reality. What? Those people who were throwing stones on you, they were throwing stones on you, Ya Rasulullah. You became a cloud of mercy on them by praying for them. How does one do this? You have to be above. You have to be at another spiritual plane, at another spiritual level, at another spiritual maqam. You remember the moment in time where Imam Sajjad, after Karbala, there were revolutions that happened in Mecca and Medina. First of all, after Karbala, as you know, Yazid attacked Mecca and Medina. Waqatul Harra and all of these things happened historically. But then also there were revolutions that happened where people from Mecca and Medina, they revolted also. And they started revolting against the rulers that were appointed by Yazid. And in that time, some of them began to flee. And one of the people who began to flee, according to some narrations, he jumped into the caravan of Imam Sajjad, who was traveling. You know, the Imam used to go to Hajj and different things. And he said, "Which caravan have I come into?" He said, "This is the caravan of Ali bin Hussein, Sajjad, Zainul Abidin." And he gave him food and drink and protection and everything. And he says to him, "Had you known who I was, you would not show me this hospitality." And the Imam looks back at him. He says, "Hasim ibn Namir, I recognized you from a mile away. You're the one who put the spear in my brother Ali Akbar's chest." But this was the maqam of the Ahlul Bayt. They never stooped down to the level of the opposition. And the reason I mention this is because when you go and you make your target and your hadaf the destruction of the opposition, it diverts you from your spiritual goal, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Sayyida Zainab said, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila." She said, no matter what you do, Yazid, you cannot turn my face, symbolically speaking, away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards you. What do we say when we say salat before we start salah? According to some narration, some people recite, "Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal ard." This notion that I direct myself, my face, towards the creator of the heavens and the earth. That metaphorical sense, but also in the reality. So the enemy wants what? That you get demoralized. They want you to stop believing in Allah. They want to torture you to the point that you say, "Ya Allah, I loved you, and as a result I had to face these hardships." And in that process, we don't realize, but we let the opposition win. And this is exactly what we learn from the life of Fatema Zahra. That despite all of the difficulties, despite all of the obstacles, despite all of the injustices that took place on her and her family and her loved ones, she never diverted away from the zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the progression towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important for us to try, within whatever capacity we have, to embed the following. Number one. Number two, when it comes to this lady's life, it's understandable and it's important for us to understand the elements of her traits that are universal. Knowledge, courage, patience, the spirituality that she brings in our lives. What do I mean? You see, when you look at the life of Fatema Zahra, the ulama are clear that on the day of judgment, there will be a cry, "Ya ahla mahshar, ghuddu absarakum." O people of the court of the day of judgment, lower your gaze. Why? Fatima enters into the court. Now, the ulama also say that Fatima Zahra's maqam, her position, her status is not fully known in this dunya. It will be known in the hereafter. Meaning what? Meaning the concept of our job in this life is to struggle and do what's right as much as we can within our capacity. But that doesn't mean necessarily that our full value will be known here. That doesn't necessarily mean that we will be recognized during our lifetimes even. There are many philosophers, poets, historians, thinkers who during their time, people didn't recognize them or value them. Because the saying goes, they were ahead of their time. Sometimes 20 years ahead of them time, sometimes 40 years, sometimes a lifetime. Sometimes they're in their own lifetime they get recognized. For example, Dr. Norman Finkelstein, in this recent Middle East challenge, he has paid a huge price for over 15 to 20 years. But only now have people realized sometimes. I'm not saying he's perfect, I'm giving an example of how sometimes people are ahead of their time. People say one thing, but the populace may not be ready. Now this is one aspect of the equation. The other aspect of the equation is, you may find a parallel between Fatema al-Zahra and academics who try to do the right thing in society today. What do I mean? Fatema al-Zahra, according to narrations, she would answer the questions of the people that were there as much as possible. You see, Fatema al-Zahra is not to be taken lightly. One or two examples. Number one, where's Fatema al-Zahra in the Quran? And if you look at the narrations, according to all Muslim historians and Muslim mufassirin who do tafsir of the Quran, they would say that Fatema al-Zahra is found in certain places undisputed. She is found in the Quran in Ayatul Mubahila. There are some Zahiri verses and there are some Batani verses. Some apparent verses, some allegorical verses. And so, for example, she's found in the Ayah of Mubahila very clearly. She's found very clearly in Ayat al-Tathir. She's found very clearly, for example, in the Ayah of, for example, Surah Dahr, Surah Insan, Hal ata ala al-insani hina min ad-dahri lam yakun shay'an mazkura, and many other places. But she's also found in some verses of the Quran as a batin, as in an allegorical perspective. One of them, according to our scholars, such as Ayatul Jawadi Amuli and others, they say is with respect to Inna anzalnahu fi laylatul qadr. That is, what do you know about that we revealed it in the night of Qadr? وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ. This notion that what do you know what is Laylatul Qadr? One meaning of Laylatul Qadr, of course, is the essence of what the Zahiri meaning, which is the night of power, Laylatul Qadr. But there's also an allegorical meaning that is the ta'wil that the ulama say, which is related to Fatema al-Zahra. Number one. Number two, when it comes to this aspect of her, you will also find her in traditions. And not Shia traditions necessarily, Ahl Sunnah. I invite you to read the books of scholars from the Ahl Sunnah world. Example, Tahir al-Qadri. Tahir al-Qadri is not a Shia, but he wrote an entire book on the fadail of Fatema al-Zahra and the traditions about Fatema al-Zahra from Rasulullah. For example, where Rasulullah said, Fatima bad'atun minni. Fatima is a part of me, for example. Where he says, Fatima is ummu abiha. Fatima is the mother of her own father. Or for example, she is Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen. She is the greatest of the ladies of all the universes. So what I'm getting at here is her presence and her position and her prestige is something that is honored and recognized by all. Another element of this relating to our world and our society is Islam did not limit a lady's position in a maqam in terms of spirituality. She can go much higher than many men. And the examples are throughout. You'll find the example of Asiya, you'll find the example, the wife of Fir'aun, you'll find the examples of, for example, Maryam alayhi salam, Khadija salamullahi alayha, and of course Bibi Fatema. You also find the examples of Zainab, and many other great personalities. Now, Islam had its theoretical principle, yes, and Islam wanted to elevate these personalities, and it did. But afterwards, remember, the history of Islam and the history of Muslims became different. What Rasulullah aspired to and worked his whole life for is different from what ended up happening. After Rasulullah, during the time of the Khulafas and the later Umayyad dynasty and Abbasid dynasty and other dynasties, the notion and the concept was that tribalism, that racism, that discrimination, the sexism, it seeped back into the culture of the society. That was not the vision of Rasulullah. That was not the vision of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That was not the vision of the Ahlul Bayt. That's why they always had someone who was from the other gender, from the females, that was always at the forefront with them in some way, shape or form. And I remind you what some of our scholars such as Ayatollah Ali Naqvi and others have said with respect to the maqam of Fatema al-Zahra, that when all Muslims accept, when Fatema al-Zahra would enter into a gathering, Rasulullah would stand up and give her a seat there. And he says that I didn't find any of the other imams doing this with their daughters. And I realized that this is not something that is a father-daughter matter. This is a leader-to-leader, role model to role model respect that Rasulullah is showing. And so this is something for us to realize. Now coming to Fatema Zahra, an element that she teaches us is that leadership is not bound necessarily by gender. Fatema Zahra in her own right was a great leader. Fatema Zahra in her own right was someone who was a great scholar. Fatema Zahra in her own right was someone who was a great activist for justice and social change for the betterment. She was someone who teaches us how to be a mother, how to raise children, but also at the same time, how to be courageous, how to be valiant, how to be someone who changes society for the better. Now coming back to this, and very quickly with respect to this, we talked about this notion of courage, also patience. You see, when it comes to our world, you'll find this amongst the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. They made a stand and they paid consequences. You'll find throughout, the Ahlul Bayt were known as the most knowledgeable people of their time, and they were also known as people who paid a price for the justice many a times. Imam Ali alayhi salam paid a price for his adherence to justice. He was left without friends. Amir al-Mu'mineen himself says in Nahjul Balagha, adherence to justice has left me without friends. That's how much he was adhering to justice. That he would say salam to people and they would not even respond to his salam. Imam Hassan alayhi salam was paid a big price with respect to adherence to justice and how the people tried to undermine him. That Imam Hassan was ready to fight, but he couldn't find loyal companions to fight alongside him that he could trust. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is in front of you. As the poet says, Iqbal, kya tamasha hua Islam ki taqdeer ke saath, qatl Shabbir hua nara takbir ke saath. He says that what game, what travesty, what spectacle, what drama was played with the history of Islam. The head of Hussein was cut with a takbir. You're saying Allahu Akbar on one side. You're saying finish Hussein off so we can go pray. How confused are you? And so this is where spirituality comes into the equation, about understanding that I'm doing what I'm doing for the betterment of society while still not getting bitter, while still trying to do it with love, while doing it with compassion, such that someone does not get numb spiritually. So now Fatema Zahra, as she was someone who would teach women. For example, there's a narration that one day a lady came to her, and she was a young lady who brought questions from her own mother. So this young girl brought questions from her own mother and brought them to Fatema Zahra. And she answered question 1, then question 2, Fatema Zahra answered, then question 3. And at that point in time, Bibi Fatima noticed something. She noticed that as this young lady was asking questions, eventually a moment in time came where she hesitated. It seemed that she had more questions, but she didn't ask them because, you sometimes feel like I've troubled the person enough. She had more questions, but she resolved to not ask them. And she said, I think that's enough, I'll go. She said, no, if you have questions, ask. She said, no, I don't want to trouble you. I don't want to bother you. And she says, Bibi Fatima says, what would you say about someone who is tasked with carrying a heavy boulder, a heavy weight up a mountain? But for every time they do it, they are given reward that is unsurmountable, a very large reward for it. What would you say? She said, that would be noble, that would be good. I said, yes, the example is like that. That yes, this burden of knowledge is something that Allah has given us. It's a gift from Allah, it's a blessing from Allah. But for each ability to disseminate this, to share this, to make society better, we get our reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't hesitate, ask and ask away. These are things that you hear in theory, the same way that the poet was saying about you hear in stories and fairy tales. But to implement it, it's very difficult. The Hippocratic oath, that they do in medicine of do no harm, and this idea that you will help people out. But the reality of the matter is that ends up being in theory, in terms of, you try to ask like society, there's different burdens and spectacles, and you can't always help people all the time. But to implement this, you learn this from Bibi Fatima. The next thing that I'll mention, and I'll draw to a conclusion tonight, with respect to this great personality, is learning from her activism. The knowledge did not stop to the speech. The knowledge continued to go to a higher level of activism. If you look at our world, some of the people who have spoken about justice or against injustice in our modern world, many of them have been professors. Many of them have been academics. Many of them have been journalists who studied the reality and said that, look, this can't be right. And then they spoke out. But when they spoke out individually, sometimes they paid big prices. For example, I've given other examples of people such as Noam Chomsky, and there's many others, the new historians from Israel, if you've heard of them, Ilan Pepe and others, who paid a big price. Professor Pepe was someone, or is someone who he defended to the teeth the Israeli government, and he said eventually he switched, and he said this is not right. We've been told a lie. The history that we've been told is a lie. Him, Benny Morris, and others were others, but some of them got pulled to the other side because the pressure, sometimes not everyone's able to take the pressure. And one thing that you learn from the Ahlul Bayt is they were willing to take the pressure, even if they were alone. And that's not easy. It's easy to say, difficult to do. But human beings, as humans, we often think that, if it's my business, if it's my income, it's my livelihood, it's something, I won't speak out. And this is happening in front of our eyes. Certain celebrities, actors, professionals, individually they've spoken out, and they've been blacklisted. This is in front of you. And that's why Islam came with the concept of the ummah. Remember, the most important thing in Arabia at the time was the tribe. And Allah, through His messenger, took the tribe and He expanded it to the ummah. But if we don't have a concept of ummah, then these things persist. There's a benefit in numbers, of justice, of equality, of fairness. But that's where we need to revive this spirit. There's much else to say, but Fatema Zahra teaches us how to be an intellectual and academic, but also an activist. By going to Fadak, by going to help Rasulullah in the field, by going to help those who need help, and also by teaching her children. What does the poet Iqbal say? Iqbal, in his poetry, when he writes in his Farsi Diwan, I invite you to read the book by Sayyid Khamenei called the Spirit of Islam, on the poetry of Iqbal. And he said that the spirit, you need to understand the spirit of what he's mentioning from Islamic teachings. Anyways, he says, Maryam az yek nisbat Isa aziz, as seh nisbat Hazrat Zahra aziz. Iqbal, again, not a Shia, he's a Sunni Muslim, but he's saying, look, for one reason, Maryam is exalted. She's the mother of Isa. If that's the case, then for three reasons, Fatema Zahra is exalted. Then he continues on and says, Noor-e chashma rahmatul lil alameen, the light of the eyes of rahmatul lil alameen, of Rasulullah, is Fatema Zahra. And indeed, the narration substantiate this. And he says, Banu-e-aa, tajdar-e hal-ata, murtaza mushkil kusha, sher-e khuda. Her husband is the one who has the crown of hal-ata, murtaza mushkil kusha, sher-e khuda. And why did he say he has the crown of hal-ata? Because no Muslim can deny that the verse hal-ata al-insani hina min ad-dahr was revealed for Ali and Fatima and Hasanain. Nobody can deny. And then she continues that her son is who? Who is the qafila salare Karwan ishq, of the caravan of ishq, divine love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Her son is Hussein. In one aspect, some people may say that he's saying, is Iqbal saying that, Fatima is exalted because her husband, her father, her son, or someone? Or there's another way. Remember, in poetry, you never go on the soul surface level alone. Analysis, if you go to academia and universities, people spend a lifetime analyzing Shakespeare and Keats and Milton and the likes about the interpretation. And one aspect is, it is a someone and the support of someone like Fatima who gives rise to Rasulullah. The support of Fatima that gives rise to Ali al-Murtada. It's the support of Fatima that gives rise to a son like Hussein ibn Ali. That is the access of the Panjitan is Fatima Zahra. Allahumma salli ala. So having said this, in light of the understanding of Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha, Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha, Bibi Khadija, and all those great personalities, you will find that in our communities, in our societies, we need more models of leadership, not only at the theoretical level, but also the practical implementation level of leadership, because Islam doesn't have a problem with this, number one. Number two, when it comes to this, we need to try to understand the spirituality. Az-Zahra means the illuminated one, or the one who's illuminated. One aspect is physical illumination, the other is spiritual illumination. How much of my life is illuminated with respect to the teachings of this great lady? I remind you and I remind myself every Fatimiyya, and it's something that is of benefit. Ayatollah Najafi Mar'ashi, in his public wasiyah to his son, but to the community at large, he listed 25 points, of which 3 directly he related to Fatima Zahra. And he told his son, with respect to Fatima, at least 3 things. He said, number 1, my son, make sure that you always recite the tasbih of Fatima Zahra. Not just after salah, but whenever you're in difficulty. Because Rasulullah gave this at a time when she was in need. And if there was something better, Rasulullah would have given that to her. So this tasbih, we sometimes, because of the dynamics of our lives, we run through it, but there's a power within it spiritually. Number one. Number two, he says, never forget khutbah fadakiyya, the khutbah of fadak. And he says that many of the great linguists, many of the great intellectuals have neglected this khutbah. There's a lot of wisdom therein, and we need to be mindful of it, aware of it, and study it and analyze it. Shias in the past, they used to memorize the whole khutbah by heart. They said it was part of their identity as followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Because one of the things that I'll mention here is, every time people ask, is Fatimiyya a time for unity or not? And one element of the equation is, we need to define unity, which inshallah we'll do another time, and Mutahari has helped define this. But another aspect is, at some level, unity does not mean conformity. Unity does not mean I compromise my belief system for the other person to the point that I get diluted out and there's nothing left of my belief system. Because if anything about our society today will tell you, if you repeat something that's not true enough times, eventually people start believing it. And one of the statements that has been used, unfortunately, historically until this time, against the Shia school of thought, is that Shiaism was a political movement that had no Islamic basis. And the reality of the matter is, when we forget Fatimiyya, we forget this essence. Fatimiyya and what happened to Bibi Fatima is what allowed Karbala to happen. And I'm not the one who's saying this. Ayatollah Safi Gul Paygani is saying this. In his book, Fatimiyya is Ashura. That he says, as soon as the sanctity of Fatima Zahra was violated, it opened the door for the violation of all of Ahlul Kisa, all of the Ahlul Bayt. And the final thing that Ayatollah Najafi Marashi says to his son, with respect to Fatima Zahra, he says, make sure you do the tasbih, make sure you study the khutbah fadak, and make sure that in the qunut of your salah, you recite at the end, بِحَقِّ Fatima wa abiha wa ba'liha wa baniha wa sirr al-mustawda' fiha. This notion that by Fatima and her father and her husband and her children, and the secret with which she is buried, was sirr al-mustawda' fiha. There's a secret within her personality that's not known in this dunya, that will be known perhaps in the hereafter. These are some of the elements of her life, but the world was not just and fair to Fatima Zahra. The narrations say that after Rasulullah departed from this world, Fatima Zahra, Bibi Fatima, used to weep and remember her father Rasulullah. And when she would remember her father Rasulullah, she would weep in day and night. And at that point in time, the narrations say that the people of the city came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and they said, Ya Ali, tell your wife, tell Fatima Zahra to either cry in the day or cry in the night, but not both, because we are not able to operate. Our daily activities have been inhibited. Our daily activities have been affected. She cries day and night, and the wails, perhaps they were remembering some of the zulm that they had done. Perhaps they were remembering some of the atrocities. Perhaps they didn't want to hear these wails because they was affecting them in another way. Allah knows. But eventually, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to Fatima Zahra and he says, my dear wife, Fatima Zahra, the people of the city have come forward and they are saying that, oh Fatima, either cry in the day or cry in the night, because this wailing of yours, this crying of yours, this weeping of yours is affecting their lives. Allahu Akbar. Fatima Zahra, first she loses the dearest one to her, Rasulullah, and on top of that, they are putting constraints on her weeping and her commemoration and her tragedy. Bibi Fatima would say, Baba, subbat alayya masaibun, law annaha subbat ala al-ayyam sirna layaliya. Baba, after you, those masaib, those musibah, they fell upon me, that if they fell on the days, they would become the dark nights. And this was the tragedy of Fatima Zahra, that she was having to deal with difficulty after difficulty. This Fatima Zahra was the light of the eyes of Rasulullah. Magar azadaro do jumle sun lijiye, yahi Ayatollah Najaf Marashi jinka zikr maine abhi kiya, unhone ek aur waqia bayan kiya कि उन्होंने कहा कि मैंने आलम ख्वाब में एक मंजर देखा. क्या मंजर देखा? मंजर ये देखा कि वक्त का امام جائے نماز پہ تشریف فرما ہیں اور گریہ کر رہے ہیں، اور جب میں عالم خواب میں امام کی طرف رجوع کرتا ہوں اور ان کی طرف آتا ہوں تو میں کیا دیکھتا ہوں کہ میرے سامنے کوئی چیزیں ہیں۔ امام نے کہا اے شہاب الدین تمہیں پتا ہے یہ کیا ہے میرے سامنے؟ امام نے انگلی کا اشارہ کیا، انہوں نے کچھ دیکھا، انہوں نے کہا امام آپ ہی فرمائیے، آپ ہی بتائیے۔ اس امام کے سامنے ان کے مصلے پر کچھ کیل تھے، کچھ نیلز تھے جن میں خون پیوست تھا، جن میں خون لگا ہوا تھا۔ کہا اے شہاب الدین، آیت اللہ نجفی مرشی کا نام شہاب الدین تھا، کہا اے شہاب الدین یہ وہ کیل ہیں جو میری جدہ فاطمہ کے جسم میں پیوست ہو گئے تھے۔ امام دیکھ کے گریہ کر رہے تھے۔ یہ وہی منظر ہے کہ بی بی پہ وہ ستم ڈھائے گئے کہ واقعی دن رات ہو جاتے۔ امام حسن سے پوچھا گیا، آخری منظر زحمت تمام، امام حسن علیہ السلام بعد واقع شہادت بی بی فاطمہ، امام حسن مدینے میں کبھی چھوٹی راہ سے گھر نہیں جاتے تھے، لمبی روح سے لیتے تھے، وہ راستہ جو لمبا راستہ تھا وہاں سے جاتے تھے۔ کسی نے پوچھا یا ابن رسول اللہ، فرزند بطول، اے حسن مجتبی، آپ ہمیشہ مسجد سے گھر تک آپ لمبا راستہ کیوں لیتے ہیں؟ آپ سیدھا راستہ کیوں نہیں لیتے؟ چھوٹا راستہ کیوں نہیں لیتے؟ کہتے امام نے فرمایا مجھے ایک منظر یاد آ جاتا ہے، میں جب گزرتا ہوں کسی کا گھر نظر آتا ہے، میں ایک لڑکا تھا، میں نے ایک منظر دیکھا کہ میری ماں در و دیوار کے درمیان پیستی گئی اور ایک شخص نے میری ماں کے منہ پر ایسا وار کیا، ایسا تماچا لگایا، مجھے وہ منظر یاد آ جاتا ہے۔ سلام ہو آپ پر امام حسن مجتبی۔ مگر شاعر نے کیا کہا؟ 40 برس روتے نہ کیوں عابد مستر، کربلا سے کوفہ و شام تلک زین العابدین سکینہ پر تماچے و تماچے دیکھتے جا رہے تھے، کون پوچھنے والا رہا؟ علی لعنت اللہ علی القوم الظالمین۔ وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون۔ صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، معتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين۔
یا فاطمہ زہرا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، سینے میں لیے رنج و علم کرب و بلا کا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، بابا سے ہے ملنے کو چلی ام ابیہا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، آنکھوں سے لہو بہتا ہے، پہلو ہے شکستہ، یا فاطمہ زہرا، یا فاطمہ زہرا، یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا فاطمہ زہرا. امت نے بہت آپ کو تڑ پایا ہے بی بی، ہر حق کے لیے آپ کو ترسایا ہے بی بی. غاصب نے جو دربار میں بلوایا ہے بی بی، اس دکھ سے لرزنے لگا خود عرش خدا کا. یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا زہرا. شبیر کی دنیا میں ولادت سے بھی پہلے کہتی تھی یہ زہرا کہ بہت سہتی ہوں صدمے، بچہ یہ میرا کوک میں بے چین بہت ہے. بچہ میرا کہتا ہے کہ اماں میں ہوں پیاسا. یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا فاطمہ زہرا. سینے میں ازل سے ہی میرے کرب و بلا ہے، جاتے ہوئے زہرا نے یہ دنیا سے کہاں ہے. کیا شام میں جانا ہے یہ سب مجھ کو پتا ہے، کٹتے ہوئے صحرا میں ہے شبیر کا لاشا. یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا. دنیا سے چلی کہتی ہوئی بنت پیمبر، غم کرب و بلا کا ہے لیے یہ دل مضطر. آتا ہے تصور میں میرے شام کا منظر، اللہ رکھے زینب و کلثوم کا پردہ. یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا. یہ کام رہا صدیوں سے بس اہل عزا کا، پیاسوں کے لیے بہتا رہا اشکوں کا دریا. شبیر کا پرسا دیا زہرا کو ہمیشہ، شبیر کو دو مادرے شبیر کا پرسا. یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا. صلو علی محمد و آل محمد. توجہ زیارہ. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتيه فيها طويلا.